Hello! Today I'm going to show you how I built a single focus anamorphic lens using this. This is an anamorphic adapter built for 16mm film projectors. I got this for $5 way back when, but you can find them on eBay. The price and quality are highly variable. Obviously I got very lucky with mine. But it is an adapter, which means you're going to need to attach it to what is called a taking lens. In this case, a Helios 44-4. This is an old Soviet lens, which is borrowed from an old German pre-war design. And to attach them together, you're going to need something like this. This is an adapter which screws onto the front of the taking lens and then clamps the adapter in place. In my case, costed far more than the actual anamorphic adapter itself. But anyway, once I had all this stuff, I took it out for some tests. And this would generally be the part of the video where I play some nice music and bore you with some pretty B-roll, you know, style over substance. But anyway, I really liked this. I think it has a really beautiful, unique look. And I was very impressed. Unfortunately, it's also completely f***ing unpractical. First of all, because you have this big anamorphic adapter screwed onto the front of your lens. I nearly broke my lens mount using this. And second of all, because you need to focus both of them separately, the adapter and the taking lens. They focus in different directions and by different amounts. And so it was just completely impractical to use it on any kind of like video shoot or commercial or anything. So this thing sat on my shelf for years, until by chance I was looking at a picture of a Zeiss Master Anamorphic. Now these lenses cost about as much as a new car, and they are enormous, and it occurred to me, within the volume of this lens, I could fit both the taking lens, the adapter, and the gears to be able to focus them both together. And so, I had 2 weeks of holiday and was stuck inside during a pandemic, and after a bunch of prototypes and designing, and voila, here it is, there's the lens, ta-da! Short video, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, no I'm playing. As it turns out, I assembled it wrong. So you can see everything's askewed. This is the byproduct of trying to assemble a really complicated project during the middle of a 27-hour online horror movie marathon. But it means that I'm going to take it apart and put it back together so that you guys can see how I did this. So let me just whip out my trusty screwdriver and start disassembling. This would be a good time to point out that in this video, I'm going to completely skip over the entire design process. If you're interested in that and you want to see how I did this and possibly even to be able to do it yourself to adapt the design, just let me know and I will create that video. But right now, this part's pretty boring. So through the magic of editing, so these are all the parts that go inside this thing. This would be the point in the video where I insert some macro shots on a slider and show you each individual part and tell you what you're going to need for this project. But seriously, if you actually want to do this yourself, just look in the description. There's a list of everything you need and a link to the Thingiverse where you'll find all the parts. Basically, you're going to need a 3D printer and a bunch of M3 screws. If you're in a country which doesn't support the metric system, aka the US, I'm sure you'll find something similar. So the first thing I'm going to do here is attach the base of the lens to the lens mount adapter. So the Helios lens I'm using is an M42 mount, and my camera is a Sony, so E mount. So I'm using this adapter, and it's very handy because it gives you something to clamp onto, and this is what supports the whole rest of the lens. So anyway, we're going to use two 40mm M3 screws. And first of all, we're just going to lightly screw this down because we actually need to adjust it afterwards. So I'm going to take out my camera, attach the lens there, and then kind of just by sight, I'm going to just adjust it so that it's roughly in place, or sorry, roughly level. Now this part's non-critical, but if you do get it as close to level as possible, you are going to make your life a lot easier later on. This lens is designed to have a top and bottom. So now that I've got it lined up, I'm going to tighten it down, take it off, take it back off my camera, and now the next step, which is what I completely skipped when I was assembling it the first time, is we're going to just assemble the part that puts the anamorphic adapter in place so that we can adjust that first. But first, because I'm confused, I'm going to try to put the aperture ring in place. This step actually comes later in the build process. I'm going to realize this a bit later, but we can still take a look at it. So this just gives us a nice big ring to which we can attach to a follow focus or something else. This just pressure fits onto the lens and then is held in place by the other elements later. It's designed so that it matches the notches of the aperture ring on the lens itself. And there's a little smooth part where the lettering is, and you just have to line it up to that lettering to be able to get it in place. And then if you've printed everything out correctly, it should just slide on. So now we're going to put the anamorphic adapter holder in place. Unfortunately, as I was designing this, I didn't give a whole lot of thought to how I was actually going to assemble it. So some parts are kind of hard to get in place. This is one of them. I'm just going to line it up. And all I say is just you have to be patient putting this in place. It is a very, very tight fit, but just be patient and try not to force it. Now, what I'm realizing now is that before I put it in place, I actually need to put something else in there, which is this is the nut holder. Yes, I'll thank you for not giggling. As I said, I didn't put a whole lot of thought into how to actually assemble this when I was designing it. So as it turns out, some of my assumptions about how I was going to be able to assemble it were wrong. And in this case, you need something to hold the nut in place so that you can screw into it later. This will be a recurring theme as we go through the video. So anyway, to get this lined up in the correct position, what I'm doing is a little trick where you kind of roughly put the nut in the hole. Then you put the screw in, lightly screw it into the nut, and then you can pull the nut down into the position it needs to be in. Then you put the holder, the nut holder on top of that to hold it securely in place, and then you can unscrew and remove it afterwards. I'm doing this in a slightly different order than I just described it, but anyway, I'm just verifying that the nut is actually in the correct position. And this particular nut holder is held in place by this adapter when it slots in. The rest of them, you have to be very careful because it's just being kind of held in place by friction. And it's why I had to assemble this thing probably 5 times before I got it right, because I kept doing stupid things like shoving screws down too hard, which just shoved the nut and the holder out of place, and then had to disassemble to put them back in. Anyway, once you've got the anamorphic holder in place, then you're going to screw it tightly down with another 40mm M3 screw and nut. Now for all of these screws, you want to screw it down tightly and securely, but you don't want to over tighten. You got to remember these are just plastic parts, and if you tighten too hard, you're going to crack it, and you're going to have to print it back out, and then you're going to be unhappy. So I should have explained earlier, the geared ring which is on this anamorphic adapter is not part of the adapter itself. This is also a 3D printed part. I just didn't want to take it off because it's incredibly snug, and it was hard to get it on the first time, and I was worried that if I tried to do it again, I might break it or loosen it or something else. Anyway, the anamorphic adapter has an orientation. It needs to be aligned along a specific axis. In this case, mine has a little red dot that indicates where the top is. So I'm just kind of roughly getting that in position with the middle part of the body here. And then once we've got it roughly in place, we are going to attach the screw to clamp it down, but we're not going to clamp it down all the way yet because we still need to do the fine adjustment. And that's what we're going to do now. So first we need to attach this middle part of the body to the base of the body. I'm just pointing out that there are some other nut holders which are already in place here, which I didn't want to take out because they were very snug, and again, I was worried I was going to break them or they wouldn't fit snugly again afterwards. Before I do that, I'm going to attach the light catcher to the taking lens. So this body is not at all light fast. So what I did is I just created this little part that just screws onto the front of the taking lens. And this does 2 things. First of all, it just blocks any light leakage. And second of all, it just makes a nice little extra holder to make sure that the adapter is properly aligned with the taking lens. So now I'm going to try to put the 2 halves together, and there's a little notch on the bottom of the middle part that slides into the bottom part. You see, it takes me a second to get that aligned, but it'll kind of click into place when it does. And now I'm going to lightly put these screws in place. So remember, on the other side of this is a nut being held in place, being held by friction by a little holder. It is very easy to shove these holders out of place. If I had it to do over, I would design it differently, but I didn't. So what you have to do is just screw it lightly in place so you don't dislodge the nut. So what I'm doing here is, it's kind of out of frame, but I'm just using the weight of the screwdriver itself to press down on the screw. I'm not putting any extra force on it. And if you do that and you have everything set up right, it should just screw down into place. Once I've got that and everything's nice and secure, I'm going to take out my trusty A7S, which is what we're going to use to do the calibration. And this would be a good point to say that if you are enjoying this video, if you find it useful, you might think about liking and subscribing. I make no money from these videos, and so the helpful encouragement really does keep me going. Anyway, there are many very good ways to calibrate to get the anamorphic lens perfectly aligned. There's a trick I've heard where you shine a light on it, and you can use the lens flares to see if it's completely horizontal. You can do lots of things. I just did it by hand because I'm lazy. But about this point, I realized that I do have an actual external monitor with some tools which will help me do this. So that's what I'm going to work on now. This is my Atomos Shogun Inferno, and it has an anamorphic mode, which allows you to de-stretch the image so you can see what the final image is going to be, which makes this whole process a lot easier. First of all, I'm setting the aperture, and now I'm just carefully adjusting the rotation of the anamorphic lens. So you can see what it does here. It just kind of skews it one direction or the other as you turn it. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, which I definitely don't recommend. But there's lots of good videos on YouTube about how to do this. Anyway, once you get it to the point where everything looks perfectly level to you, we're going to tighten down the anamorphic holder clamp to make sure that it doesn't shift anymore. By the way, this should be on the top, but unfortunately I assembled the body upside down, and apparently I was too lazy to fix it. Also, the nut holder on the side of the lens is too loose because apparently I can't measure things. So I'm just shoving a small screwdriver in the gap here to allow me to tighten it down. Anyway, now that we've got that now that we've got that set, we can remove it from the camera again. And I'm just unscrewing it from the base. Again, you want to be very careful here that you don't accidentally dislodge the nuts that are in the middle part. And once I've got this unscrewed, then we can go about the process of properly setting this up. So the next thing I'm going to do is something I could have done earlier, which is just attach the gear ring to the taking lens focus. I could have done this earlier, but I didn't. Now we are going to attach the ball bearings. This is the holder. It just kind of slips over the top. And this holds the bearings in place so they don't slide all around everywhere. And this part, there's some really clever ways you can do this with tweezers or whatever, but I'm just doing it by hand because I'm a masochist. Basically, I'm just dropping in a bearing every other slot in the holder and then slowly rotating it around. You have to be very, very careful when you're rotating the retainer that you don't lift it up. If you lift it up, then the bearings come out of place and they just start sliding around everywhere, and you have to remove them and start all over again. So for this, I would highly recommend having a magnet, or in my case, a screwdriver with a magnetic tip handy to pick up the ball bearings that try to escape. Even though I was incredibly careful with this, I still screwed it up and had to do it twice. And even though I counted the ball bearings, I was still picking them up out of my carpet hours later. So once you've got all of these in place, which is going to take you a little while, the next thing we're going to do is attach the main gear. Now, unfortunately, since I didn't really think about how to assemble this while I was doing this, you kind of have to squeeze it to get it in place. At this point, I realized that I skipped a step and forgot to reattach one of the retainers. So I'm going to slide it in here now, and then I'm going to realize that I didn't actually put the nut in place and fight to get it back out again. So long story short, the first thing you should do is attach all of these nut retainers just to make sure that you don't have to keep doing it later. Anyway, I'm going to do the trick again where I put the screw through to hold the nut in place, then pull the screw tight to pull the nut into the place where it's going to be, to pull the nut into the receptacle in the body, and then I can slide the retainer in to hold it there. But again, this is just pressure fitted, so you have to be kind of delicate with this. And yes, again, I really should have designed it a different way, but sue me, this isn't my day job. Anyway, now that you've got that in place, we're going to take 2 of putting the main gear on. And also you have to be kind of careful you don't jostle the base. If you shake it too much, then the bearing's going to jump out of place and you're going to have to start all over again. Now that we've got that there, we're going to add the gears that engage with the anamorphic focus. So I'm kind of skipping that step, but each of these gears has 2 6mm bearings in it. So when we've got it there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully drop a screw into it to make sure that it's lined up with the hole beneath it. And you don't want to push on this too much, or again, you're going to dislodge the nut. And we don't actually need it all the way in. The screw actually goes through the next piece I'm going to attach through here. We just need to make sure that they're lined up properly so that we can get that screw through later. So you have to do this kind of delicately. Once you got them in place, then you can shove down the main gear. There's an inner gear which engages with these things, and then which in turn turns the anamorphic. And we need to make sure that it's completely centered, that I don't have a gear tooth off to one side or something, so that it can turn freely. But do not turn this right now or you will screw everything up. So anyway, once I've got that done, I'm going to carefully remove the screws so I don't dislodge one of the bearings. You'd think after like the 4th time I did this I would have learned, but I didn't. So set the screws aside, and then we can put the next bearing in place. So this is just like the last time, except it's a bit easier because it's not recessed, and so now it's also a bit easier to see what I'm doing. So I'm just, same thing as before, carefully placing the ball bearings, rotating it, and then putting in another. I'm sure there was a very logical reason for why I'm doing one in every other slot. I can't for the life of me remember what it was anymore. You can do it every slot too. It's probably easier to do it that way. I don't know if I was saving time or if I had some really logical reason for this, but whatever, this is the way I did it. Okay, so once you've got those, then we can attach the front part of the body to it. So you can't see it here, but I've already got 2 40mm M3 screws in place. And I just need to guide those in so that they go through the bearing and down to the middle part of the body and into the nut. So I'm just carefully screwing these by hand again so I don't dislodge the nut in the nut holder. And once you've got them started, you can be a little bit less delicate with them because the nut's not going anywhere, it's already there. Anyway, so I'm going to screw this down. There should be another little click as the 2 parts of the body meet together, and then I'm just testing the friction here. So these screws are really just holding the body together. We don't want it so tight that it actually makes it hard to rotate. So I'm just kind of carefully screwing and unscrewing until I have just the right amount of friction between them. Then I'm giving a little shake to make sure that nothing came loose. And then we can get to work assembling the gearbox. So this part already has some nuts pressure fitted inside them. From the last time that I assembled this, I didn't want to disassemble it because they're a really tight fit. And again, I was worried about, breaking it or just loosening things. But again, it's pressure fits, so you're really going to have to squeeze them in place. So this thing fits inside the body and translates the gear motion from the main gear to the focus gear of the taking lens. And we have 2 gears here, which are 24 to 12 and 24 to 13. They look very similar, but it's important you don't mix them up because the 13 is obviously slightly bigger, and if you put them in the wrong position, you'll never get the thing together. So each of these also has a 6mm bearing inside it so that they can turn freely. And now I'm going to spend a lot of time looking back and forth, trying to remember which direction they actually go in. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you look at it, and you can think about it this way, the 12 gear is the one that engages with the focus gear of the taking lens. So that's the one that's basically going to have to be at the bottom as we're looking at it. Anyway, once you got that sorted out, then we're going to add 2 40mm M3 screws to this to hold them in place and screw the whole thing together. And again, just like with the front of the body, we want it screwed down just enough so the thing holds together, but not so much that it's adding any additional friction to the gears. Everything should turn very, very freely here. And it's at about this point when I realized that I was trying to use the wrong screw. And here we've got the right screw in place. So this is the 40mm M3. And to get this thing in place in the body is a bit of a trick. Basically, you've got to turn it on its side, shove it all the way back, turn it 90 degrees, and then try to pull it back up until it slides into place. It's a bit of a trick. It's kind of hard to show on camera, but I hope that made some sense. But you see, once it's in place, it fits very snugly. And then I'm just using two 30mm M3 screws to hold it down. And these you do actually want to tighten down until they're very snug so that there's no movement on this gearbox. Now, once we get that in place, we get to the really tricky part, which is attaching the back to it. So the first thing I've got to do is set the focus of the anamorphic part to infinity. Unfortunately, with this design, I don't actually have any focus markings. So you're going to see me looking at the taking lens and trying to remember which direction is which to get it in the right direction. Anyway, both of them need to be set to infinity. So when you put it together, they're calibrated to one another. Then from there, everything should be relative for all the other focus positions. Okay, so once you've got both of them set to infinity, then you're going to slide the back part of the body on. And this took me way too long. So the first problem I have right near here, which is going to take me a second to realize, is that the screws that I already have pre-attached to the base got stuck, and so they weren't allowing me to slide the thing down. Once I got that fixed, it's just a really tight fit. I should have designed it with a beveled edge on the gears, but I didn't, which means, and since the gears fit very snugly together, it's just really, really hard to get it in there in place and get the gears to slide onto one another. As with every other part of this build, all I can say is, be deliberate, be persistent, but remember that these are 3D printed parts and you don't want to break anything. So once you got that in place, we're going to attach the back screws again. And once again, you just kind of want to lightly add pressure. You don't want to shove down in it or you're going to dislodge the nut, and then you're going to have to take the whole thing apart and start over again. And here, now that I've got it assembled, I'm just checking the friction on the main focus gear. And it's a little bit tight, but this loosened up after time. So the step that I completely skipped here that you really should do is sanding down all of the bearing races. I didn't. I regret it. Now what I'm doing is I'm attaching the focus threads to the front. So I made this little clamp which clamps onto the front of the anamorphic adapter and holds a 77 to 72 millimeter filter thread in place. Unfortunately, there's no way to actually tighten it in place unless you have a really tiny right angle screwdriver attachment or something, which I don't. So I basically just pre-tighten this until it fits very, very snugly, and this seems to work okay. And then the last thing to attach is the front ring. This just screws in place, but it is a 3D printed part, so you kind of have to be gentle with it, make sure it's very level, and then just screw it down very, very firmly. This gives the whole thing an unmoving 95 millimeter wide front ring, so you can attach it to a matte box. The filter thread, which is attached to the anamorphic adapter, will actually move back and forth a little bit. This doesn't move, so it can fit on matte boxes. And there you go. That's the whole thing assembled. And because I'm hardcore, even the front and back caps of this thing are 3D printed. So the last thing to do is just attaching it to a camera. This is easier said than done. It is really, really big. And in my case, it's an E-mount. E-mount is not designed for big, heavy lenses. So I made this part which holds the lens firm and attaches to 15 millimeter rods. This is really specific to my setup, which means you're going to need something like this to hold it fixed onto your camera setup. But you're probably going to have to adjust this part, or, I mean, there's plenty of ring holders for lenses on the market which attach them to 50 millimeter rods. My problem here is that I designed it wrong. It was a little bit too snug. So I'm having to sand this down so it actually fits onto the rods. Again, there's many solutions for this on the market, which I would highly recommend, because the one that I did is totally impractical. It just fits by friction. The top of it, you need a screwdriver to fix in place, which would make lens changes a huge pain in the don't be like me, do things properly. Anyway, this is boring, so let's just skip ahead. And ta-da, this is what it looks like rigged up. So at this point, I was going to go outside, go down to the river, capture some really awesome B-roll, show you guys some really spiffy, pointless focused pulls. I made it as far as my garden to do some quick tests before I went any further. I noticed that it was shaking like crazy, which is partially because I had the wrong focus gear on my follow focus, so I was having to wrench like crazy to make this thing turn. And second of all, because I realized too late that my camera base plate was loose, so the camera was shaking every time I touched it. And then it started to rain, so I just ran inside and decided I would rather shoot something with teddy bears. I probably should have just waited another day to go back out and do some more test footage, but knowing myself, if I waited, I never would have actually made this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please think about liking and subscribing. Leave me a comment. I do have plenty of other crazy projects that I've done in the past or have planned in the future. If you'd like to see more videos, please let me know. Like I said, I make no money from this. I'm just doing it for fun. So any encouragement I get really does help me to get off my ass and make more videos. So thanks for watching. Have a great day. And let me know if you actually build one of these yourself. Bye.